The first time I said no to my husband, he forgave me with silence. The second time, he punished me with it. He did not shout, he did not strike me, he only blew out the bedroom lamp, turned his back, and let the dark settle between us like a sentence I had already been found guilty of. By morning, I understood something no Amish woman had ever said to me plainly. A wife could refuse her husband once and be called tired, but if she refused him twice, the whole house began to turn against her. And in our world, the house was never just the house. It was his mother, the bishop, the women at church, the quiet looks after Sunday service, the warnings spoken over coffee as if they were kindness. My name is Margaret, and I grew up in a strict old-order Amish settlement in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I left when I was 26, and now I tell the stories we were taught to swallow whole and call peace. People on the outside usually think the Amish rules are the things they can see: the dresses, the prayer coverings, the hooks instead of buttons, the buggies on the road, the black shoes lined beside the door, the kerosene lamp burning low over a kitchen table scrubbed white with years of use. But the visible rules were never the whole cage. The real rules lived in the pauses, in the way a woman lowered her eyes when a bishop spoke, in how your mother folded dough with red knuckles and told you, "A soft answer keeps a house warm," in how older women warned younger ones without ever saying the dangerous part out loud. They would say, "A wife mustn't be hard-hearted," or "Men carry a heavy load too." Or my favorite, the one spoken over coffee and shoe-fly pie as if it were ordinary household advice. "Don't make him ask twice, Margaret. Some troubles start in a wife's spirit before they ever show in a man's face." Nothing was ever plain if it mattered. We had the ordnung, of course, the written and spoken code that governed our lives: how to dress, how to worship, how to behave, how far from the world we were allowed to stand. But there were other laws that never appeared on paper, laws passed from mother to daughter in the pantry, from aunt to niece in the washline breeze, from newlywed tears to knowing looks on a church bench. A wife was expected to be cheerful without being loud, useful without being noticed, tired without complaint, pregnant if God sent it, grieving if God took it, and available in all the ways a husband believed marriage entitled him to. Not once, in all my girlhood, did I hear a married woman say she had a right to refuse anything inside her own home. I was born into a family of 10 children. My father was stern, not cruel. My mother was kind, but the kind of kind that had survived by bending so long she no longer remembered she had a spine. Our farmhouse smelled like yeast and wood smoke in winter, like wet wool and coffee and onions frying in lard before dawn. We worked hard. We laughed sometimes. We believed we were blessed because we knew no other word for endurance. Church was every other Sunday in our homes, benches carried in from one farm to another, sermons long enough for your feet to go numb on the cold floorboards, men on one side, women on the other, heads bowed, voices low. The bishop preaching submission as if it were the same thing as holiness. And maybe to him, it was. That is something I understand now in a way I did not then. Most of the people who hurt me were not inventing a new cruelty. They were protecting an old order that had shaped them too. They believed suffering had meaning if it kept the walls standing. I married Eli Byler when I was 21. He was quiet, hard-working, broad-shouldered, the kind of man people trusted with livestock and accounts and church errands. He did not court me with poetry. Amish men don't. He showed up, he fixed things, he spoke respectfully to my father. He asked me once, plainly, if I would build a life with him. And I said yes, because in my world, that was what a good woman did when a steady man asked. The first year of marriage was not miserable. I need to say that because truth matters more than drama. He could be gentle. He liked my bread warm from the oven. He tucked extra hay around the mare when snow came early. He brought me whorehound candy from a trip to a neighboring settlement once and set it on the table like an apology for something he did not know how to say. But there was a difference between being a good man in public and being taught what love meant in private.
I learned quickly that marriage in our world did not create conversation, it ended it. When I was tired, I was supposed to keep working. When I was sad, I was supposed to pray. When I was overwhelmed, I was supposed to be grateful. When I needed tenderness, I was supposed to be less difficult to love. The winter I was 23, I lost a baby before I had even begun to show. I had not told many people yet, but in a small world, women always know. I remember standing barefoot on the cold bedroom floor, one hand on the bedpost, feeling my body become a place of departure. Afterward, I wrapped the stained cloths myself. My mother came and made soup. My sister Sadie washed jars at the sink so hard I thought the glass would crack. No one asked me what I felt. They asked when I thought I would be back on my feet. For weeks after, my body felt like a house with one lamp still burning in an empty room. I moved through chores because chores were what our people trusted. Grief looked too much like rebellion if it lasted longer than others found comfortable. One evening, maybe 3 weeks later, Eli came in from the barn, smelling of winter air and cattle and sweat gone cold. I was standing at the stove stirring beans, and my whole body felt heavy, not just tired, but unreachable, as if I were watching my own hands from the far end of a hallway. That night, I told him no.
I said it softly. I said I wasn't feeling well. I said I was still hurting. He did not shout, he did not strike me. He rolled away and said, "A man shouldn't have to beg comfort from his own wife." In the morning, he was polite, which was worse than anger. He thanked me for breakfast like I was a stranger serving him in someone else's home. The second time happened 4 nights later. I had spent the day canning beets with his mother, who never looked directly at my face when she was speaking about anything serious. Her hands were fast and capable, pink from hot water, the veins on the back of them like blue threads under paper skin. She said, "A woman's first duty is keeping bitterness out of a marriage." I remember the knife in my hand going still over the beets. I remember thinking, she knows. That night when Eli reached for me, I froze before he even touched my sleeve. Something in me had gone quiet in a way that felt dangerous, like an animal backing into the farthest corner of a stall. I said no again. This time I did not give a reason. That was the part he could not bear. He sat up in the dark and said very calmly, "You are my wife." As if that settled the matter. When I still did not move, he got out of bed, he blew out the lamp, and by dawn, I understood what Amish husbands can do to wives who refuse them twice, even if they never lay a hand on them. They can take the warmth out of the house. They can turn daily life into a lesson. He stopped speaking except when necessary. He criticized small things in a voice soft enough to sound reasonable if anyone overheard. Too much salt in the potatoes, shirts not dried right, harness leather not cleaned the way his mother cleaned it. He began lingering after church with the men while I stood alone near the buggy, my hands inside my muff, the March wind cutting through my cape. At home, he became devout in a new, performative way. Longer prayers, sharper observations about obedience in sermon discussions, comments dropped like nails on a table. A stubborn spirit opens doors for the devil. A peaceful wife is a blessing to any house. He never said my name when he said these things. He did not need to. Then his mother began stopping by more often. One morning, as we rolled pie crust in my kitchen, flour dust floating in the sunbeams, she said, "Some women make life harder than God intended." I asked, "Did Eli say I was making life hard?" She folded the dough in half and answered in that old Amish way, with a sentence that carried 2 meanings and mercy in neither. A wise woman doesn't wait for her husband to speak to know he is burdened. I wanted to scream. Instead, I pressed the heel of my hand into the dough until it tore. That was our way. Rage turned inward became housework. A week later, the bishop came. Not officially, that is important. So much of the control in Amish life comes before anything official ever has to happen. He arrived near dusk, boots muddy, beard moving in the wind, his buggy wheels crunching over the frozen lane. We served coffee and molasses cookies. Eli sat straighter than usual. I could feel the shape of the conversation before it began. The bishop spoke first about marriage, about unity, about the danger of worldly ideas entering the home. He said modern people talk too much about rights and not enough about duties. Then he looked at me with that grave pastoral sadness men use when they are about to call your pain a temptation. Sometimes, he said, a wife confuses her feelings with righteousness. I stared at the steam lifting from my coffee. I can still hear the clock on the wall. Tick, tick. I wanted someone to say the plain truth. I wanted one person in that room to name what was happening, to say that grief is not rebellion, that a wife is not a door a man gets angry at for being closed, that marriage without mercy is just a cleaner room for loneliness. But no one said it. That was the night I began to understand the system more clearly than I ever had before. The punishment was not only what one husband did, it was the net waiting underneath him. Mothers, bishops, sisters-in-law, sermons, silence, all arranged so neatly that by the time a woman realized she was trapped, everyone could still say no one had tied the knot. What happened after I refused twice was not one dramatic event, it was death by 1,000 little obediences. My place at the table felt smaller. My words came back to me thinner. I began apologizing before I even knew for what. My body started speaking before my mouth had permission. Headaches, a tight chest, hands that shook while pouring coffee, nights awake under quilted blankets, staring at the ceiling, listening to Eli breathe beside me, and wondering how a person could disappear without leaving the room. The strangest part is that I still blamed myself. That is what systems like that do. They teach you to measure harm by whether it leaves a bruise. If it doesn't, then maybe you are just ungrateful. Maybe you are cold. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe holiness is supposed to feel like being erased. The first crack in that lie came from another woman. Her name was Anna, and she was older than me by maybe 15 years. We were hanging wash behind her house, the sheets snapping in the spring wind. She did not look at me when she spoke. She said, "Some of us get smaller after marriage. That's how we know the house is being kept properly." Then she pinned a shirt to the line and added, almost under her breath, "But small is not the same as safe." It was the closest thing to truth I had ever heard from a married Amish woman. Months later, after another bishop visit and another season of learning how to make myself agreeable, I left. Not in one brave cinematic moment, more like a long internal leaking out until there was enough self left to carry across the threshold. I left after dawn one October morning. The kitchen still smelled like yesterday's bread. The sky was pale over the cornfields. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tie my shoes. I stood with my bag by the back door and looked once at the table, at the jars cooling on the counter, at the life I had been told was the only righteous one available to me. And I understood something with a clarity that felt almost holy. God had never asked me to disappear. People had. Leaving cost me nearly everything at first. My mother's voice grew formal on the rare occasions she spoke to me. Some siblings turned their faces away in town. I lost my language before I found a new one. In the outside world, people asked easy questions with impossible answers. Why didn't you just say no? Why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't anybody help? Years later, in a therapist's office that smelled faintly of tea and hand lotion, I heard words I had never been given growing up. Coercion, conditioning, nervous system, consent. I sat there on a soft gray chair and cried so quietly it barely felt like crying at all. Not because the words were dramatic, because they were precise. For the first time in my life, my pain was not being translated into a moral failure. It was being named. That changed everything. I do not tell this story because every Amish husband is the same. They are not. I do not tell it because every mother-in-law is cruel, or every bishop malicious, or every woman who stayed weak. That would be a lie, and lies are what kept us trapped.
I tell it because in closed systems, harm often survives by looking ordinary, by sounding religious, by wearing plain clothes and speaking softly at the supper table. The most dangerous rule in my world was never written down. It was this: if a woman is hurting, teach her to call it duty before she calls it wrong. So, if you are listening to me right now from a place where silence has been renamed respect, where fear has been renamed submission, where your own body has been trying to tell you something your mouth is not yet allowed to say, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not rebellious for feeling pain. You are not dirty for needing tenderness. You are not broken because something inside you will not go numb on command. And if the people around you only know how to love the version of you that never refuses, that is not peace. That is control with a hymn laid over it. Sometimes I still remember that bedroom lamp going out, the way the dark dropped over the bed, the way the whole house seemed to agree that I had done something terrible by wanting to belong to myself for one more night. But I also remember the first apartment I rented after I left, the cheap blinds, the humming refrigerator, the silence that was not punishment, just quiet. I remember standing in that little kitchen, barefoot on linoleum, making coffee for one, and realizing no one was about to enter the room and explain me out of my own instincts. That was the beginning of my life. Not the life I was promised, the real one. So if this story found you for a reason, stay. There are more stories like this, and I will keep telling them. Leave a comment if any part of this felt familiar. Sometimes the way out begins with reading your own truth in someone else's sentence. I used to think holiness meant enduring until there was nothing left of me to offend anyone. Now I think God sounds more like truth than fear. And I know this much for certain: the silence was never holy. It was just silence.